venture starts with my obsession with the early sloops of war, and in particular their origins in the Second and Third Dutch naval wars of 1666 and 1673. Before I break into any detail, there are two major points to make. First, this reconstruction has been developed by a team. Apart from myself, two members were from the Stuart Yacht Research Group, Effie Moneypenny, a civil engineer who lives in England, and David Anshaw, who is known to most of you. Jointly, they have produced a work on the yacht Veldes, now published by Sea-Watch Books. Now, this yacht was commissioned slightly later than the subject of this reconstruction, but since the master shipwrights who built these yachts also built the sloops, there is likely to have been some similarity of practice applied to each. So David and Effie's advice was central to this inquiry. Also on the team was Alan O'Neill, who is familiar with computer-aided design and who very generously agreed to draw up all the thoughts the other members had about what was right and wrong. Inevitably, there were many iterations, and Alan displayed outstanding patience in applying all our thoughts to the drafts. There was much discussion on the details of the craft, and this included several disagreements which took time and patience to resolve. In carrying out this investigation, some 200 emails winged between members of the team, plus the occasional Zoom meeting to sort out tricky details and enable Alan to adjust and modify his draft of the vessel. John Garnish agreed to join the team towards the end, and being a scientist, started from an essentially practical standpoint to question some of the conclusions we had reached. Again, answers were eventually found to meet the points he raised. Now, the second main point is about reconstruction. In this case, the evidence was sparse. To the best of my knowledge, no plans of these small warships exist, and there is pretty little evidence by way of logs as to design, construction, and fitting. The team was therefore forced to rely on the graphic work of the Vandervels, father and son, and on Pepys' list of sloops. Now, the latter gave us critical dimensions of these vessels, including that of Bonetta, of which 17 were built in a hurry in the Royal Dockyards in late 1672 and early 1673. One more was built in 1677, as you can see at the bottom here, but for a different reason. You may argue, why bother with such flimsy evidence? However, I have to say that I find this quest far more engaging than simply digging out some drafts from the collection of the National Maritime Museum and constructing a model on that basis. I shall give examples of how we had to dig for information to answer some of the questions posed by looking at the works of the Vanderbilts. I defy anyone to say that their reconstruction is correct in every detail. All that can be done is to search for the best evidence you can find and use it, plus a knowledge of the practices used at the time, the role of the vessels, and some seagoing common sense to produce as good a reconstruction and model of the original vessel or vessels as can be made. This is very much in line with the motto of the Nautical Research Guild, to which all the members of this team belong. So how did these naval sloops come to be ordered and built? The earliest evidence of this was a letter of 1666, signed by James, Lord High Admiral of England, and brother to King Charles II. The letter was to the Navy Board requesting the building of a number of shallops for the towing off of damaged ships from the line of battle, where they were in danger of being captured. In fact, he was asking for a batch of fleet tugs. The word shallop is of interest because at that time, the well-known Biscay double shallop was a massive rowing boat with two masts. which is a fair description of what the naval sloops were to be. The word shallop gave way to the word sloop. We also here need to bear in mind that for most people, a sloop is a merchant vessel with one mast. As you will see, the naval sloop of this period is a trifle different. In all, 21 of these small warships were built. Surprisingly, only 3 in 1666, and mainly for harbour defence and communication. And as already mentioned, 17 in 1672-3 for the role of fleet tug. In the latter period, they were all designed and built by the master shipwrights at the Royal Dockyard. Thus, they varied in hull shape, dimension, armament, and inevitably rig. They all had small crews, sufficient to sail them and manage them with sweeps in calm water, but when required to tow wounded ships out of the line, they would take on board extra men from the ship being rescued to man the full complement of sweeps, and in the case of Bonetta, 22. The precaution of providing fleet tugs proved in the end not to be needed. However, these small warships were at these battles in the Third War off the Dutch coast, together with ketches and yachts, all acting as tenders and communications vessels and as a means of sounding out the tricky shoals of this stretch of the coastline. At the end of the war, unlike the line of battleships, which were placed in ordinary, i.e. laid up, they continued to work on patrol, fishery protection, anti-smuggling operations, and interport communication. In line with these tasks, their rigs could be altered for the job in hand, and to a certain degree by their captains to improve performance. The sloop we chose was Bonetta because there was a good sketch of her by Van der Velde the Younger. She lasted longer than most, being sold out of the service in 1687, by which time there is some evidence that she carried a mizzenmast and may have had a fore and aft main course. And this points to the difficulty of reconstructing a specific ship. In addition to the scant information, there's the inevitable alteration in rig, equipment, armament to match the required tasks. So, in many ways, this project has been undertaken to produce a generic design, albeit to the exact dimensions of Bonetta, and matching this particular sketch of her by Van der Velde the Younger. Now, it would take an age to run through the full list of discussions and arguments we had, so I'm going to deal only with selected problems, and these will be the choice of underwater body. There were no drawings of these ships ashore, the arrangements at the stern, the dimensions of the cabin, the problem of the gun height, the length of the sweeps and the method of rowing, and the shape of the stem and head. I will also touch on the sail plan and rig. As there appeared to be no plans of this type of craft, and as there were in effect massive rowing boats, we turned to a plan of a longboat from a later date and used its lines to develop the underwater body of this vessel. Fortunately, the plan was for a vessel 30 feet long to the touch. That is, in effect, the keel, which is very close to half the length of Bonetta's keel. The shape would eventually be changed to a slight degree by the modifications made to the upper works. Van der Velde's drawing of the stern was well detailed, but we had a difference of opinion on whether or not it was a Bezant stern or whether it was a conventional counter and taffrail. A Bezant stern is best described as one where the taffrail is not part of the structure of the stern, but is attached to large, usually decorated brackets protruding out from the aft bulkhead. Like so many other parts of the sketch, we had to consider very carefully what we were looking at. Now, in this image of a model of a Bezant yacht, you will note the highly decorated brackets which hold a separate and very ornate taffrail. Note also that the windows are below the taffrail. Now, my contention was that we had here a conventional arched counter running up from the wing transom to the underside of the taffrail. If you are working from a Vanderbilt sketch, then you have to be true to it, and by examining the port handboards, there was no sign other than the counter ran beside the board. Had this been a Bezan stern, there would have been a near vertical line inside this mark, indicating that what appears to be a conventional taffrail is in fact something separate from the bulkhead. The other feature that supports this contention are the small windows on the taffrail, which would make no sense if this were a Bezan stern and therefore removed from the aft bulkhead. I shall refer again to these windows shortly. Now, moving forward, we come to the dimensions of the captain's cabin. The first consideration here was the standing headroom. Now, with a lot of experience of cruising in a Scandinavian boat, 4'6" was my recommendation. This was backed up by David with a suggestion that anything provided would be a little more than a hutch. The position of the cabin ceiling was also dictated by the position of the quarterdeck, which was determined by the location of the small windows in the taffrail. You can just see these if you look at the taffrail marked in at the bottom end of the taffrail. The cabin's sole position was dictated by the narrowing shape of the hull and the framing on which it rests as it approaches the transom close to the waterline level. A workable compromise was eventually reached with access gained by placing the companionway under a cowl on the port side of the quarterdeck. Now, one of the features that puzzled us for some time was the location of the gunport, as its height above the deck level, which we could determine by plotting the line 19 inches below the bottom of the sweep ports. This measurement will be explained shortly. It seemed to indicate a large gun. If we had inserted the smaller caliber weapons of this period, then we would have to lower the position of the port, from that indicated in the Vanderbilt sketch. Now, somehow I stumbled across a gun of this period, which was of small caliber and mounted on a high carriage. Now, the gun in question is a bastard minion Drake, in essence a 3-pounder. It was discovered in the Sound of Mull. Mull is one of the Inner Hebridean islands off the west coast of Scotland. Currently, the gun and its replica carriage reside in a museum in Edinburgh Castle. The gun and its carriage were recovered by a marine archaeologist, Colin Martin, working on the wreck of a small warship called the Swan, a pinnace of the same period as our sloop. Now, this weapon and its the height above deck level of the port drawn by Van de Velde Younger, and as importantly, were the right length to be drawn back onto the centre line of the vessel, leaving nothing exposed beyond the bulwark. Again, moving forward, we considered the rowing arrangements for the vessel. As I have said, Bonetta was set up to be rowed with 11 sweeps aside. The position of the sweep ports are indicated clearly in the Vanderbilt sketch. One of the Society's members had made an outstanding model of the Charles Galley, complete with sweeps, and in his view, the oarsmen would have been stood to row and have pushed their sweeps as opposed to pulling them. The length of the sweep was determined by the beam of the vessel, the position in which the oarsman would hold his sweep, and the height of the sweep port above the waterline, and the need to get the blade fully immersed in the water. The final length, after reconstruction by David, came out at 18 feet. Note that if the oarsman had sat to row, the sweeps would have had to have been an unmanageable 30 foot in length, and we believe that when not in use, these sweeps were held in brackets outside the quarterdeck, or possibly close to the mast, or possibly between them. The shape of the stem caused a lot of argument, as there are very few clear paintings of the stems of these vessels, except in one grisaille in the possession of the National Maritime Museum. Now, this picture shows a sloop with a conventional commercial stem. There is no head bolted to it. But if you look carefully at the bow in the Van der Velde sketch, you will see something rising above and to the port side of the bowsprit. At first, we thought this might be a lowered foresail. The difficulty here is that the foremast of a sloop was right up in the bows, and its forestay was secured well out along the sprit. Some felt it was an emblem placed directly on the stem, whilst others felt that its position lay forward the stem. In the end, the latter opinion prevailed, and it can be seen here with the stem drawn in red and the emblem well forward of that. You can also see where a mark is made at the point at which the bowsprit pierces the bulwark to the right of the stem. So with an emblem in that position, how was it supported? A visit was made to the storehouse of the National Maritime Museum at Kidbrooke, behind Greenwich, by one of our members, Geoffrey Fenn, to inspect some large paintings of the Battle of Texel in 1673. And viewed online, these paintings contain some illustrations of these sloops, but the resolution was so poor that nothing could be deduced from the images. Some photographs were taken, but these also lacked clarity. However, they gave just enough detail to show that in some cases, sloops were fitted with a stem head. In this painting, the artist has, for some inexplicable reason, decided to omit the bowsprit. The location of the stem could be seen from the vertical black line just above the head, and the head seems to be connected to the bulwarks by some kind of rail. Remembering that the master shipwrights who built these vessels also built the Stuart Yachts, we looked at the practice on a model of one such yacht to draw up a simplified version. Now, David came up with a profile of a head that could be bolted onto the stem. My version is in blue, and David's more elegant version is in red. So at present, we have two choices: either to reconstruct the plain stem, as it is shown in most pictures and sketches of these craft, or to set up a stem head supporting a small lion. Now, finally, some points about rigging, a far easier task to tackle, as there are some good images of the rig used. The main image we used was the grisaille, to which I already referred. The majority of sketches and paintings indicate two masts, but I have found one at Felbrigg Hall on the North Norfolk coast, which definitely shows a sloop on the right with three masts being fitted with a mizzen. This is also a painting of the Battle of Texel. You will also note that the main yard is hung by ye thirds, and this is allows to afford a practice well known at the time, and it allows a greater fore and aft trim to the sail by setting the yard cock-a-bill and bracing it round to resemble a lug sail, making it possible to sail more closely to the wind. Now, if you look at this sketch of Bonetta, you will see two small lines standing up from the quarterdeck. These could represent the location of a mizzenmast, but we must remember that this sketch was made several years after the Battle of Texel, by which time her rig could have been altered. The evidence here is too sketchy, literally, to lead us to give her a third mast. So that concludes the first part of the presentation. In the second part, Alan will explain how he put all these into a draft in preparation for the building of a model. In doing so, he will show some early sketches I made of these vessels, which do not tally with what we are doing with Bonetta. But given that there were many variations in the design of these vessels, this does not detract from what has finally emerged from our study of this particular vessel.